The Museum Island in Berlin is something really exceptional because it's really more or less an island surrounded by the river and founded by the Prussian kings in the 19th century. And it was the inspiring movement of Friedrich Wilhelm III and Friedrich Wilhelm IV who launched this big project in their royal garden, if you want to say, to have first the Altes Museum, the old museum, as the first building on the Museum Island, and then the second one, the Neues Museum, has been founded in 1842, 1845, then the Bode Museum, now called Bode Museum, and the Old National Gallery came onto the island. And the last one was the Pergamon Museum in the 30s of the 20th century. So it is an exceptional surrounding for 5 museums covering some of the most important heritage treasures of Berlin. To have the Nefertiti's bust on the Museum Island and of course in the Neues Museum is a big fortune for us. It's something exceptional to have something of these World Heritage pieces among others here in the Neues Museum. But have a look, it is something like the Louvre has the Mona Lisa, or others in Dresden, they have the Sixtina, the Madonna. So I think many museums all over the world, they have a special key piece where they are especially devoted, and of course we are happy to take care for the bust of Nefertiti. The question, who was Nefertiti, is really an important one, because who is that woman? She was the royal spouse of King Akhenaten, formerly called Amenhotep IV, and as queen of the royal spouse was of course always important in the history of ancient Egypt. But Nefertiti has really a special role, because in the new theology of the Amarna period, Akhenaten and Nefertiti were the royal couple directly under the blessing of the sun god Aten. And Aten, Nefertiti and Akhenaten, they are more or less something like a triangle. So the god at the very top, and then you have the royal couple. The male part, and the most important one, of course, was that one of Akhenaten, who was the prophet of the new theology. But Nefertiti had the role of the female part within this religion, and therefore she was very, very important for the whole theological impact of the Amarna period. It's a very important question to stress the point that in ancient Egypt, women played an enormous important role throughout the whole history. It's not only during the time of Nefertiti. It's from the very beginning that women are more or less, equal to men. Equal in a special way. You have to regard it to the history of the ancient times. So it was, of course, like this, that women had their special role in housekeeping, household, but they were priestesses as well. And the royal spouse and the queen are of enormous importance, because you have to realize, if you are the great royal wife, and you gave birth to a son, and the son was appointed to be the next pharaoh, then the mother directly became something like a goddess, because pharaoh on the throne was something like in a double nature. He was a god and he was a human being. And so the women at the royal court played an enormous role. Nefertiti's bust seems to be so important because she's so colorful. I think if that piece would have been excavated without any color or with damaged color, it wouldn't have that effect like the bust has it nowadays. It's more or less perfect in preservation. Of course, some smaller parts are missing, but the colorful expression of that face of the bust is striking for every visitor or every one who has a look at the bust itself. And it makes the person so vivid. You have really the feeling to be in her presence. And I think this is something which is overwhelming for visitors, to have these wonderful colors still preserved. But on the other hand, you have this in ancient Egypt as at many, many points. Remember the wonderful tombs in the Valley of the Kings, or the private tombs in the necropolis of Thebes or other necropolis all over Egypt. The brightness of the colors in ancient Egypt are striking, and I think that's perhaps the key point. To ask the question about the sculpture and the name of the sculpture Thutmose is something which has to be dealt with delicacy and some carefulness. Because we know that Nefertiti has been found in a sculptural estate, so in one room of the living house of a sculpture. And the way how the history began, that everybody is speaking about Thutmose as the sculptor who was responsible for the bust, is something which is a history which became its own story. Because the only and tiny thing which we have from the sculpture Thutmose is a part of a horse blinker in ivory. And this broken part of a horse blinker, which has been attached to the horse equipment, names a sculpture Thutmose. But the piece has been found in the dump of the estate. So nobody really knows who lost this. Was this really the piece who belonged to the master of the house? So it became a story of its own to say, okay, there is a piece from the sculpture Thutmose, and because there was somebody who had a horse, and having a horse means something, so it must be Thutmose who was responsible for the bust. We have no evidence. But it is a story which I think will last forever, and you cannot stop people thinking that Thutmose was the sculpture of Nefertiti, but we have no evidence. The technique for producing Nefertiti's bust is something which was very common in the time of the Amarna period and even before. We have examples for the same procedure from the Old Kingdom as well. So it's a limestone core. So the sculpture first produced the bust in limestone, and then, like you may call it like a make-up, they covered these limestone core with a thin layer of gypsum plaster. And the gypsum plaster was then prepared and smoothed to get the paint on it. So you have 3 layers at least: limestone core, gypsum plaster, and then the colorful painting. The bust of Nefertiti is really very well preserved, and the question how this happened is due to the circumstances you have, the natural circumstances you have in ancient Egypt. The dry climate and the circumstance that Nefertiti's bust was covered more or less 3,000 years within dry sand preserved the colors very, very well. And as I pointed out on another point of the interview, colors in ancient Egypt survived in many, many places in an extraordinary way. So the Valley of the Kings I mentioned, or other tombs. These colors are so bright, so in comparison to this, it's not astonishing that even Nefertiti survived in such a good condition. What we are doing here in the museum, we try to take care of her as best as we can do, so she is very safe here at the place where she is exhibited, and of course we are taking care that that even the showcase is constructed that no shivering can be transported through the movement of visitors. So this is really very, very safe, and we assure you that we will do everything to take the utmost care for the Queen. The cooperation with your company was a wonderful, really a wonderful experience. It was very smooth, it was very well organized, and I must say, I'm very, very happy to have this opportunity to work with you.